And they're getting so angry. They're reading the Parsha of Ben Sora Amara. Listen, if you read the Parsha about the rebellious son, it looks like about every other teenager should be put to death. If you just read it literally, he doesn't listen to his parents. Take him out and stone him. Like, whoa. Well, maybe that would, that would resolve some rebellious teenagers. But if you learn the Gemara on how the Gemara interprets what that parsha is talking about, who qualifies, there comes to be a point where the Gemara actually has a machlokas whether it actually ever occurred, because the standards that would be required are an impossibility. It becomes more of a mashal, becomes more of an analogy of how to raise or not to raise your children. Not so much as a practical thing that was implemented time and time again, not at all. So many Jews today read, we start, it's not just because of Christianity, it's paradoxically because of science. The hyper-literalism of today, of reading a text and saying, well, what does this mean in the most simple level? Like, I want to know what it factually means based on just what the text says. I don't want to even look at the text before or after. Definitely not the context of the whole Torah. Definitely not any other ideas that might have gone along with it. I want to know it in and of itself. That hyper kind of literalism that we now call fundamentalism is not just a byproduct of this kind of Christianity rejection of the oral Torah, but it's also a byproduct of modernity that wants to say everything has like a scientific meaning. So I want to read the text and tell you what I see, this is what the word says, and this is what it means, period. Beginning and end of story. That way of reading the Torah? That's not a Jewish way of reading the Torah. Many Jews read the Torah like many liberal Jews, so-called liberal Jews, read the Torah like that. I was once talking to a Reform rabbi. This is a great story. So I'm talking to a Reform rabbi, and I'm explaining to him a heter to permit somebody who technically, if you didn't have the heter, you would have to declare them a mamzer. Terrible thing. Reb Moshe, for example, I said, Reb Moshe never declared in his lifetime a person a mamzer. Reb Moshe, the greatest sage of Israel in our generation, never once, and he had many questions about this, never once. What did he do? Well, he always found a way to permit that person. If he couldn't find a way, he said, and he saw that if he would go any further, he would have to say they were. He would say, I'm a salik, I'm removing myself from being done, from judging this case. And as I was describing this to a Reform colleague of mine, he actually became bothered by this lack of what he saw as like the Torah should be like implemented in what it means. We shouldn't try to find ways out of it. I found that very fascinating. Here's a Reform rabbi being troubled by the lenient things that Reb Moshe was able to bring into play to permit a person from, God forbid, having this category. In other words, part of the reason why you need a movement like the Reform movement is because it's a lack of understanding of the role that the oral Torah is really able to play. It's not just a reaction to the rigidity of Judaism and religion in general, which it is in part, as part of the enlightenment, part of the emancipation, part of the freedom of now we have alternative ways, we have science that can explain things. We don't need religion. We don't need revelation. Religion is culture, religion is morals, advice, suggestions, blah, 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 blah. But what if the Torah was really alive? So they say they're alive. The Torah is alive. They're changing it all the time. So what's the difference then? We say Torah is alive. They say Torah is alive. What's the difference? What's the difference? So that's really a big question. I'm not going to get into the answer. One of the simple differences is that it's not just like you don't abandon something simply by saying times have changed, we move on. If you say that with great difficulty. There's a process of even saying that. There are things that the Talmud says we've changed. Like, we no longer say that you can't marry certain nations. There's a whole list of nations we couldn't marry. We'd have to wait a certain amount of generations in the Bible till we could marry into that type of nation. Comes along the Talmud. Why could we marry them? Very easy. Sancheriv came, some king came, and there's no real, the lineages are all messed up. I'm surprised if there was some Haredi of today in Beit Shemesh who say you can't marry anyone. Got mixed up, maybe they're forbidden, So again, yes, the Talmud has a way, but Moshe has a way, there is a way to work within Judaism in a way that it's alive. But it has to be within a certain framework. Once you go out of the framework, it can still be connected, but it's got to come back ultimately. It's got to come back. It's got to be connected to this. So I wish everybody, all Reform Jews, that ultimately we're one. Ultimately we're one, and we have to find we have to find our place of unity so we can come together. So how does that relate back to the Zohar? It relates again to this third point. The third point being the relatedness of what people would call the angry God of Israel as not being angry at all. To illustrate this point, there's a beautiful story of the Alter Rebbe, and I believe it was either his son or his grandson, that was known respectively as the Mittler Rebbe, Dov Ber, or the Tzemach Tzedek. I think it was his son. One of the sections, there's a couple of places in the Torah where we have these tochachot, they're these heavy-duty negative curses. So one year, his father, the Alter Rebbe, wasn't feeling well. He didn't read the Torah reading. And he used to normally read it. And his son got sick when he heard all these terrible curses. So his son was already an adult. They said, what happened? You hear it every year, you don't get sick. He says, because when my father reads it, I hear blessings. But this year, some regular guy read it, I heard the curses for the first time in my life. And I got sick. So again, the Zohar hears in the curses all God's name. That's what the Zohar says. Right? Even the rebuke of the Torah to Israel is part of the divine name. Because there isn't a word in the Torah that is excluded from the general holy name of God. Because the entire Torah is the name of God. Again, this is a dynamic change of how we read Torah. Again, it's calling out to us to stop being so literal. When you read the Torah and you get depressed, you have no connection to what the real Torah is talking about. You're a Christian. You're a modern person in your understanding, and that's why God is so angry. So every time I read the Torah, and I get angry because of the negativity in the Torah, I have to remind myself, you're looking at it through Christian eyes. You're looking at it through modern eyes. Stop what you're doing. Look at it through the Zohar. Study the Zohar on that section. There's no other way. That is, and that's why we lose Jewish people to Judaism. Because the Christian critique resonates with them because they don't know this other way. They don't know the oral law. They don't know the Chazal. It's not just to give Avi his due in this thing. The Zohar is a medrash. We don't just understand Zohar as being like some Kabbalah that's like divorced from the rest of Chazal. We understand it as a medrash. We had a shir earlier, 2 weeks ago, on the Zohar as medrash. So some of the themes that medrash already has picked up on, the Zohar just kind of takes it even further. This is one of them. Here's another thing in the Zohar. This is in Parshas Yisro. This is talking about the Ten Commandments. It's actually talking about the five, and the five, a relationship, the dynamic relationship between the first five and the last five. And also that the 10 commandments are like the 10 sfirot. What are the 10 sfirot? What are the 10 commandments? So Chazal say, and this is something that actually has somehow become somewhat, a little bit differently, integrated into Western values. What is the Western world's value system based on?
Judeo.
But more specifically, if there was one specific code, what would it be? The Ten Commandments. So the rabbis have already acknowledged, why, if, on the one hand we say there's no real significance of 10 because we have 613, so then why are there 10 Commandments? So there must be significance. So the rabbis have come up with something that says, I'm gonna say it in my own words and in their words at the same time. There's a teaching model, which is you should teach somebody something first in an outlined form, and then you could get into the detailed form afterwards. So, for example, when you teach a student in the yeshiva, first you learn the Mishnah. The Mishnah is a very concise, turns out not such so concise after you learn the Gemara in it, but seemingly a concise kind of 2 to 10 line concise ideas about a specific thing. Short, sweet. Comes the Talmud and makes it long and complicated. Now, if you would just have the Talmud, the Gemara, without the Mishnah, you would never have a chance. This way, first you learn the Mishnah, you think you understand it. It turns out you don't really understand it because the Talmud's going to ask all these questions. But at least you have this idea of like a more general thing and then a more detailed thing. It's a learning method.